It's 6 o'clock in the morning on a quiet residential street in 19th century Paris. There is a horse who needs to be let out of his stable. And if you're wondering what a horse in the city might be doing at 6 o'clock in the morning, well, he's probably relieving himself before the day begins. But there is also another explanation for why a horse would be let out of its stable so early, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Before we do, if you're new here, welcome. I make history videos about all kinds of topics, from historical tales of mystery to historical tales of romance and everything else in between. So if you like what you see, don't forget to follow before you go. As the horse is let out of his stable, you can hear the sound of a nearby tram. Well, not a tram exactly, but a precursor to the modern tram. These were called rolling trams or rolling shops in French, and they operated from 1864 to 1900. They were propelled by a stationary steam engine. Kind of like a miniature train, you may even be able to hear the clip-clop of the horse's hooves on the cobblestones as he walks past. In the 19th century, the streets of Paris were still mostly cobblestone, and those cobblestones would have been worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic. Cobblestones were first laid down in Paris in the 13th century, and they were meant to be rough. But by the 19th century, with the advent of the horse-drawn carriage, they'd become very smooth in places where they'd been walked over so much. That said, this wouldn't be the only sound you'd have to endure if you were living in Paris in the 1800s. In fact, it was probably one of the loudest cities in the world at the time. You could hear the rumble of carts and carriages of all different sizes, from the massive omnibuses that carried up to 32 passengers to the tiny fiacres that were used as taxis. And there were plenty of other sounds to be heard as well: the shouts of street vendors, the clatter of tradesmen carrying their wares, the calls of prostitutes, the braying of donkeys, the barking of dogs, the ringing of bells from nearby churches. It was such a cacophony that Parisians took to wearing cotton in their ears to block out the noise. Of course, the street sweeper is one going to let a little thing like earplugs get in the way of his work, so he begins sweeping the street, his tools clattering against the cobblestones. Street sweepers were employed by the city of Paris to keep the streets clean of garbage and debris. It was important to keep the streets clean, not only because it made them more pleasant to use, but because disease could spread through the filth. Typhoid and cholera were common afflictions in 19th century Paris, and they often spread through contaminated water and food. That's why, as the street sweeper continues his work, you can hear him put his hand in a nearby puddle to test the water before drinking from it. Even though it doesn't look very clean, the water from the fountain is probably safer to drink than water from the Seine, which was heavily contaminated by human and animal waste. And while the street sweeper works, the sounds of the city slowly begin to increase. In the distance, you can hear the sounds of a horse-drawn omnibus, and the bells of a nearby church are about to ring for the start of a new day. The steady clip-clop of hooves on cobblestones gets closer, and soon you can see a man driving two horses that are pulling a cart full of goods. There are many different types of carts used in the 19th century, and this one is called a chariot. A chariot was a two-wheeled cart used to transport goods. It had a low bed and high sides, and was usually drawn by one or two horses. As the sun rises higher in the sky, more and more sounds begin to fill the air. The rhythmic chugging of a distant steam engine, the rumble of another omnibus, the jangling of a streetcar, the shouts of children playing in the street. The sounds of 19th century Paris at dawn. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about life in 19th century Paris, I've got a whole playlist of videos about the city and its inhabitants. Check it out here.